Testing 1, 2, 3.
Hello, I'm Mahesh Saptarishi, the host of Mic Drop, a podcast where we explore what makes innovators tick. There is no template that guarantees innovation, yet there are some patterns. Without tenacity, you will likely give up too soon. Without being inspired, and without the ability to inspire others, you won't have the strength of a community. Without being creative, you'll not be able to break from the status quo. Without being knowledgeable, you'll not be able to identify consequential problems. Innovators, almost without exception, are tenacious, inspiring, creative, and knowledgeable. This is what makes innovators tick, leading to that mic drop moment. The purpose of this podcast is to learn and make that mic drop moment more likely for each of us. Thank you and enjoy.
Don't chase the competition. Look, we need to know what our competitors are doing. We need to anticipate what they might do next. We need to think about threats to our business, but chasing the competition makes you a follower. Focusing on serving customers is how you lead.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Mic Drop. Today, we're talking to Scott Mottonen. Scott is the Senior Vice President for Critical Communication Solutions. He's an incredible engineering leader, and I think we can learn a lot from him. When I spoke to Scott in preparation for this podcast, 3 quotes really stuck out, and they're natural chapters for this conversation. So let's get right into it. So chapter 1, and I'm going to quote Scott directly here. Good engineers are lazy. So with that said, Scott, can you tell us how you began your career as an engineer?
Sure, Mahesh, and thanks for having me. So I started actually in the field. I started with a group that was focused on designing and deploying large-scale communication systems for customers outside of the US. So that's where I learned how our systems are designed, how they're deployed, how they're operated. That's where I learned that things look different in the field than they look on the product designer's desk. But when I was working in this systems engineering capacity, there were some parts of the job that were just manual, repeat, incredibly boring work. And it looked to me like a prime candidate for automation. So why would an engineer want to sit around and do punch block wiring specifications for hundreds of channels in a system when every one of them was virtually the same, just from different points of origin to destination? So that led to, well, look, that's a candidate for automation. Someone ought to be able to write software that takes a set of rules and a set of inputs and produces the output. So, this is part of my good engineers are lazy. And that sounds like an incredibly negative thing, but I actually heard that first in the context of software engineering, where someone said, look, the lazy engineers find the most efficient solutions to the problem.
No, that actually couldn't agree more. Both ends of the spectrum are places that perhaps you don't want to be, right? You don't want to be in a situation where everything just seems complicated and just too hard consistently. That means you're not doing enough to make yourself more efficient. And then if you just feel like everything's boring and mundane, well, you're not being creative enough. So I think that you hit the nail on the head with that quote. So I'm going to use that going forward. Good engineers are in fact lazy. So you're a young engineer traveling all around the world, installing LMR systems out there, and you're trying your best to be lazy in some way, or at least promoting automation and other things. How did you interact with your managers? What kind of engineering leaders did you find particularly influential?
Well, first of all, I would say I've been blessed over my entire Motorola career to have had a string of really good leaders. But I mean, in the early part of my career, I had when I was working in the Iden organization, Dan Coombs was leading it at the time, and one of the things that Dan did, I think, better than any engineering leader I've met since, was this notion of we need to celebrate the discovery of problems because we can't solve problems we don't know we have. So when you're going into Dan's office to tell him about some particularly difficult issue that needs to be overcome, I never been able to emulate his embrace of discovering really hard problems. But his point was you can't solve problems that you don't know exist in the organization. I worked for some managers who had a really extreme focus on quality. And they gave me some really simple guardrails to focus on when it comes to developing quality, particularly quality software. Things like you just have to have a hygiene around your defect backlog. You have to have metrics in place. You have to keep up. Defects are not wine. They don't improve with age. And you have to have the discipline to keep up. And this is something that, we continue to carry over into the organization today, a very strong focus on a defect management culture.
And clearly, I think some of your field experience in deploying it and watching it work probably influenced your sense of importance of why things need to work the way they need to, or your point about recovering gracefully after a failure or degrading gracefully even.
Yeah, I think I told you the story about, when we would upgrade a CDMA base station in the field, right? When you upgrade one in the lab, if it fails, you just go retry it. If you're doing that at scale in the city of Chicago on Sprint's network, and you're upgrading 700 base stations and 10% of them don't come back, every one of those is a truck roll. And so, you suddenly start to realize, well, wait a minute, it's not the individual issue. It's the fact that when you repeat these things at scale, it has a very different consequence for the customer.
So with that sort of emphasis on quality and your experience in the field, I think you've been called upon a few times to come fix things. Is there any particular of your fixer-upper stories that you particularly are proud of?
I would say the biggest fixer-upper story for me was when I joined the CDMA business. Code Division Multiple Access was a 2.5G technology deployed in the US in the cellular space by operators like Sprint and Verizon and Alltel. Our biggest customers, however, were in Japan. The Japanese customers are obsessively quality focused, and they had higher expectations than we were capable of delivering on at the time. So I joined that organization at a time when Verizon was ripping, that's cellular terminology for removing our infrastructure and replacing it with a competitor's in many of their major markets because they were disappointed with the performance of the solution. So the job was, of course, you have to fix the product. There were issues in the product, but you also have to manage a relationship with a customer. You have to show them that you're credible in your efforts to improve, that you're serious about it. It takes, I often view customer quality perception as a sawtooth waveform. It builds a long time to get them to think highly of you, and it takes very little time for that to drop back down to the bottom. So the Verizon CDMA story, I often say at the time we started the quality transformation, which I think was 2003, we were probably their worst CDMA vendor. By 2006, I think we were their best. We had a much better relationship, and I'll say a stable business with them when we were able to deliver those improvements.
So now you're no longer a young field engineer. You're doing a lot of things, and you left Motorola for a little bit. You came back to Motorola. And then let's get to chapter 2. And again, quoting Scott here, good experience is hard engineering. And I like that quote a lot as well. And it's particularly interesting in the context of the APX Next story. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
I love talking about APX Next. Happy to do so.
So let's start with, what was the motivation behind APX Next?
So I hope everybody in the company understands, whether you're new or not, the importance of the Astro device business to the overall financial performance of the company. It's truly a magical business. It has incredibly loyal customers that we've built up over time. We've earned a good market share position by serving that market well for many years. So Apex is the brand name on the devices that we sell in the Astro space. Apex followed something called XTS and XTL. So we were in, say, 2016 or 17, looking at, okay, soon we will have all the customers will have upgraded from XTS and XTL to Apex, what we now call legacy Apex. What's next? What drives the next round of device refresh for our customers? So certainly there's always when the devices get to be too old to provide reliable service, then maybe they'll upgrade. But that's never That's never the way you want to get there. You want customers to want the new device because it does something new and better. How do we have something that will compel our customers to upgrade from their, what we now call legacy devices, to a next generation of the APX portfolio? But it was about giving customers a compelling reason to upgrade to continue the great financial performance of that business.
I think you mentioned that at that point, Harris was also out there with an LTE plus LMR solution. But this is a classic story of being first to market is not always automatically a sign of victory. There's a lot that you can do that makes it better. So good experience is hard engineering. And I think you identified a few areas there where you would create that good experience. So maybe you can go through some of those. What made the APX Next experience that better experience?
Yeah, so I'll say for me, the single most important experience enhancement that we delivered was the way we do what we now call Smart Connect. And so the idea was, look, instead of having the user switch back and forth between a broadband push-to-talk system and their P25 system, let's just use the mobile broadband pipe to connect the radio to their existing LMR core. So for the end user, if they run out of LMR coverage, we'll simply switch to the LTE network to connect their radio to their core. That means it's complete feature transparency. Everything works exactly the same, whether you're on a mobile broadband network or whether you're on an LMR network. Your contact list is the same. The talk groups are the same. The behavior of the device is exactly the same. When you press the emergency button, it behaves the same. Everything is exactly the same. So for the user, complete simplicity. No need to decide, am I going to use broadband or am I going to use LMR? The radio will decide. By the way, to your point, good experience is hard engineering, deciding all of the hard things like, well, when should we switch? How bad does LMR have to get? How should we switch back? I mean, there was a lot about that experience that was not easy to figure out. And, it's easier just to let the user decide. Yes, but that's punting the problem to the user instead of solving it. And so really for me, that was the space where I felt where I think that's where I started saying, yes, but good experience is hard engineering. And so that's probably where it started. There are other examples in APX Next of delivering a good experience, but for me, that's probably the most important one. We did other things like we put a touch screen on the device. So we put this simple touch user interface on the device. So instead of the classic LMR nine number keypad and arrow keys and a line by line menu display, we put a modern Android user interface with a touchscreen into the device to make the device simpler to operate. Then spent a lot of time figuring out what to put on the screen, where to put it, how big it should be. This is working with Lanting's user experience team to help us test a whole bunch of designs to deliver a good experience there.
Yeah, and remember those her team, Lanting's team, talking about the ability to touch a UI widget with gloves on, with dirty fingers when the screen's wet and all that. Which I think normally we think about touchscreen, we think about the iPhone, we think about your Samsung device or your Pixel device or whatever, and none of that really occurs to you as a problem unless you're interacting with an app while the screen is wet and you're wearing like really thick gloves in your hand. So there's clearly a lot of user experience elements there that were hard problems, I think, not only to solve, but also to go identify ahead of time.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. So yeah, it isn't just a touch screen. It's a touch screen that's optimized for the environment that we work in. But I think, that's the legacy of APX, right? Almost everything we've done in that product has been optimized for the environment in which it operates. That's why people can run over them with a truck and they still work. They can find them in a muddy field after 3 years, put a battery on them and they still work. The audio capabilities of the device. I mean, the legacy of that device is, you take things like speakers and microphones, which exist in lots of products, but you pick the right ones and then you optimize them for working in the environments that we work in.
That makes a lot of sense. I think location was the other big thing, right?
The issue was in a land mobile radio network, updating location involves sending data messages and on a very low bit rate, highly constrained from a capacity perspective network, providing good location updates was a significant challenge. And the importance of location, I think, was really highlighted for me in listening to the recordings of the radio traffic that occurred after Commander Bauer of the Chicago Police Department was shot. And easily 50%, probably well over 50% of the radio traffic was dispatch asking someone where they were. Where are you and which way are you heading? And I remember listening to that and saying, that is a problem technology can solve. So bringing a mobile broadband connection into APX Next gave us a completely out-of-band channel, doesn't take up any LMR capacity to be able to report location, and at an extremely high cadence. I mean, the balance that always happened in LMR, first of all, voice is always prioritized. So if there's voice on the channel, location is not going to get updated, almost without exception, for most of the population of radios. Having this broadband connection said we could get location updates from all the radios, and we could get higher cadence location updates. I think currently the default, if you're in an emergency condition, is every 3 seconds, the radio is sending a location update that gets updated on a Command Central aware map. So location got, in my opinion, at least one order of magnitude, maybe two, better than it was by using the mobile broadband connection for location instead of LMR.
Got it. Like that makes just so much sense in terms of, I think even now when we sell Command Center Aware, one of the key selling points is in fact location integration.
Yes.
It ends up being one of the most important things that our customers ask for. What was the other big problem that you had to solve that you felt like was a critical inflection point in making this project successful?
Yeah, so the thing that I lost sleep over for a long time on APX Next was what we called the coexistence problem. And that is the capability to have a land mobile radio operating in the 700 megahertz band, where a lot of these radios will operate based on the customer's frequencies, at the same time that it was operating on specific bands of most notably Verizon's network, but also AT&T's network, that having those two radios operating simultaneously was a serious technical challenge. There's an interference problem given the proximity of those frequencies. And so a lot of the experience that we wanted to deliver required us to run both the broadband connection and the LMR connection simultaneously. And our ability to do that was in question for months. It took the biggest technical risk to achieving our vision was, could we get those things working? And in the end, we did, obviously, but it required a lot of hard engineering. I'll say both on the hardware side, with how the product was laid out, using the best isolation technologies we knew, using really clever antenna designs. There's also software pieces like when not to send a location. Maybe you don't want to send a location update during a voice transmission, but send it immediately after. So there were a number of, I'll say, software optimizations to go with the hardware optimizations that eventually gave us a working solution. But that was maybe the greatest risk to delivering the experience we intended to deliver.
As I think about some of the really hard physics problems that I think the team has solved in making this product a reality, I mean, that perhaps is one of those underappreciated problems. It's not a usable feature in some way,
right?
But if not for that, I think the product would not have been a success.
Yeah, so this is where it's helpful to have the world's best RF engineers working on the products that you're developing.
And I think, that level of expertise, I think, as you said, not just on the hardware side, on the antenna side, perhaps on the radio side, but also the software, those teams being able to collaborate, work together, understand the limits that each can push to, is so incredibly important. Did these teams being co-located and being able to communicate with each other regularly, did that help in this process?
There's no question. There's no question that this team which was primarily located in South Florida in our plantation facility, that the team was co-located there and we're able to work side by side, both, I'll say, in theory and in reality with actual products in their hands. I think that I'm not convinced we could have delivered this product in the time frame that we did were it not for the fact that those teams were co-located and working side by side every day.
So maybe related point on teams, right? You had potentially a large team here that was working on APX Next. And large teams sometimes are necessary, but also sometimes are hard to get all going in the same direction. What was your philosophy for structuring your team so that such innovations like the ones we just talked about could actually materialize?
So I guess for me, leadership principle number one around hard things like this is clear ownership. You have to have someone who owns it, not a core team of 8 people. You need some one person who will take in the data, assess the options, make decisions. That person has to have the authority to make those decisions and have them accepted, both within the team and outside the team. But they also have to be accountable for the quality of those decisions. So, I hired Tao Tang to run the APX Next program. And initially she was responsible, I'll say, for the radio parts of it. Eventually we agreed that the only way we would be successful is if she also had ownership of everything, including the application services, which were technically going to be a service offering from the service team. So sort of soup to nuts, end to end. There was work in the software enterprise on the back end of Virtual Partner to be able to do the database lookups. And I just don't believe with something this difficult, if you don't have someone that owns it, has the authority to make decisions, and is accountable for the outcome, I just don't think you can do things this hard.
And I see a lot of people who put a lot of emphasis on things like process first. Things like, okay, I'm going to use large-scale Scrum, or I'm going to use this type of agile process, etc. When you think about your leadership philosophy, do you think about what you just laid out, ownership, accountability, and authority as sort of the drivers of whatever comes out, and process is just a byproduct of that? Or is it sort of process somehow enables ownership, accountability, and authority?
Yeah, so I guess I think process should serve someone who is in an ownership capacity. I mean, I'm not an anti-process guy by any stretch of the imagination, but I do not believe that when you have something hard to do, process alone gets you there. Because nothing ever goes according to plan. There's always something to be learned. There's always devil in the detail kind of things that you've got to sort out. So process is an enabler, but it can't overcome having someone who owns it and who is committed to delivering.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think good processes just evolve from motivated teams that are structured right.
Yeah.
And the process will fit that team. And there's so much about process that when you go process first, you also just ignore the culture of that team, what motivates that team. And sometimes you're just pushing a square peg into a round hole, and then you wonder why the process fails.
Yeah.
So you're absolutely right.
I mean, I'll bring up process quite a bit in the context of things like, okay, something went wrong. So, and it was a human error. Okay, so do we have a process in place to account for the fact that humans will make mistakes? Mm-hmm. I'm not married or wed to any specific process or process structure, but you want to make sure that the team is thinking through it systematically. Look, this thing happened. To make sure it doesn't happen again, we can either make all humans perfect, or we can put a process in place that accounts for the fact that humans aren't perfect, they'll make mistakes, and we need to contain those mistakes.
You're stressed. Stop it. Use 10% time to claim your healthy balance between responsibilities, workload, and development. Yeah, it's your time to innovate. Skill up or meditate. Ooh, your brain is in its mental prime with 10% time. Coordinate with your manager today to claim 1 out of every 10 workdays for your betterment. Pick a project or new skill to learn today and do it.
So then maybe moving on to chapter 3 of our conversation here. And this is not really a quote as much as something that you said, the relationship between portfolio evolution and combinatorial innovation. And I found the notion of combinatorial innovation something that was very appealing, intuitive, and it's something that we do, but we don't necessarily think about it that way. And so I thought we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. So just maybe if I continue the APX Next conversation a little bit, as you think about what is next for APX Next, how do you frame your thinking?
So look, when I think about evolution of the portfolio in general, what I tell the organization we need to do is, there's 4 pillars to stand on. One, there's a pillar around understanding customer problems. So I lead a team that has thousands of engineers. I'm an engineer. Engineers love technology, but it's not about the technology. It's about solving customer problems. So you always have to start with the problem statement, the issue the customer is facing, or the opportunity in front of them, and how we can help them overcome some challenge in their space. The second thing I say is don't chase the competition. Look, we need to know what our competitors are doing. We need to anticipate what they might do next. We need to think about threats to our business, but chasing the competition makes you a follower. Focusing on serving customers is how you lead. So I react very negatively to we must do X because some competitor is doing X. So I think the better question is, well, why are they doing that? What customer problem are they trying to solve? Can we do it better? Third principle, even though I said you got to be careful not to get obsessed with technology, you need to focus on customer problems, you do need to track emerging technologies. If you think about APX Next, really, at the time that APX Next was conceived, mobile broadband connectivity that was available at a low cost for a subscription was an emerging opportunity. Certainly, touchscreens had been around a while, applications running on devices, cloud technology, and what we did on the launch of APX Next was we brought all of those things, mobile broadband connectivity, we brought touchscreen, we brought apps, we brought cloud technology together with a radio to deliver a better solution. So, in this combinatorial innovation, part of that is tracking what's happening in the industry and how can you bring that to bear to better serve our customers. And the final thing, the final pillar, and actually when we draw it, it's the middle of a circle with these 3 things around the outside, is thinking about user and customer experience. I say that every stakeholder we serve, whether it's the purchasing agent, the technicians that have to deploy the solution, the end users that use it, or those that have to maintain and service it, they all deserve to have a great experience. And so we need, as we think about understanding problems, engaging this emerging technology, we have to do it through the lens of delivering the best possible user and customer experience. Now, best possible is a high bar, and sometimes you have to take steps to get there, but we should never lose sight of the North Star of what the ideal user and customer experience is and how do we get there.
Yep, good experience is hard engineering.
It is indeed.
Continuing on along this theme of combinatorial innovation, a big part of that is obviously the team and the talent that you have. How do you think about talent development for your teams? Yeah,
so I guess maybe the most important thought I have about developing talent is you give good people, rising talent, smart people, hard assignments and support them. I mean, don't put them in a position to fail, but they'll surprise you positively more often than they'll disappoint you. Give good, smart, hardworking, diligent people hard jobs, and you will stretch them and you'll be surprised what you get. So for me, it's the doing that is the most important part of talent development. It's not the listening. It's not the mentoring. It's the doing. So for me, I like to give people the opportunity to do.
I think that's pretty compelling. And sometimes there's always this hesitation to give younger talent the hardest problems for fear of failure. And I think your point about expecting that positive surprise is like is a really good one, because you're right. I think more times than not, you will expect a positive surprise out of it.
Yeah, I think you have to. I mean, the less experienced they are, maybe the more guardrails they need, the more they have to understand, what they've got the authority to decide or not decide. Giving them a network of people they can rely on to test ideas, to share openly. Again, I don't think it's not that you throw them into the deep end of the pool and hope they can swim without any support. But I think people rise to the challenge. My experience, people rise to the challenge far more often than they don't.
Agreed. So then when you have smart talent, creative talent, people who really want to stretch the limits of their imagination here, how do you give them room for innovation, or to at least think innovatively?
So outside the context of the projects that they're working on, I think that, sort of different space for innovation kind of approaches have evolved at different sites around the world. So we run hackathons in several sites, Copenhagen, Schaumburg. We have an innovation showcase in Penang. So there's a lot more hardware development in Penang. So that's not hackathon friendly. It's hard to design and build a new hardware product in an overnight or 2-night case. They've been doing those for years. We've done what we called alpha projects in some of the US sites. Again, it's often a combination of hardware and software that you're bringing together to demonstrate some new capability. The team in Krakow does some combination of all of the above, innovation showcase, hackathon projects, but all of these are opportunities for people to work on ideas that they're passionate about. And when they're done, to share those ideas with business leaders and technology leaders in the organization. There's, some will fit into the portfolio, some won't. This is just taking really clever people, giving them some challenges to think about, what kind of solutions we could develop, and then trying to develop some IP around those ideas.
Makes sense. I mean, I've had good success with hackathons in the past. I think we had one quite recently, which was, I felt I was impressed with some of the ideas that came out of it. And we made this hackathon somewhat unconstrained. There was no thematic element to it. And it was mind-blowing how folks thought about some unique ideas that if there was only a constraint where we said, innovate along this path, we would never have seen, and we would have missed something that's truly usful.
Yeah, we've done both. We've done both the thematic sessions and again, I think you're right. You get a lot broader set of solutions when you unconstrain it. You said impressed. The word that always comes to my mind after a hackathon is I'm inspired. Just watching the passion with which people attack these projects that they're interested in is, for me, it's just inspirational to see the effort and the time and the energy that people put into ideas that they love.
Couldn't agree more. Anyway, Scott, this was an awesome conversation. The way the conversation divided up into those nice chapters, good engineers are lazy, and that means you want to make a product as simple to use as possible. That's why good experience is hard engineering makes so much sense. And then to get that good experience with that hard engineering, you need that combinatorial innovation. So they all tie so beautifully. So I love it. I love your approach to this. And thank you for making the time.
Oh, it was my pleasure. It was my pleasure, Mahesh. It was good talking to you.
Thank you for listening to Mic Drop. We would love to hear your thoughts on our podcast and your ideas for future episodes. Send us a note at micdrop@motorolasolutions.com. We promise to maybe read all your emails. And with that, I'm out.